The Medellín Cartel. It wasn't just a name. It was a colossal criminal empire that tore up the rulebook of the underworld, its name becoming a chilling synonym for cocaine for years to come. Pablo Escobar, Carlos Lehder, José Rodríguez Gacha, and the Ochoa brothers were the chief architects of this terrifying machine. The fate of the infamous Pablo Escobar has been dissected in a nearly 2-hour-long intelligence tape. But in this dossier, we will turn to forgotten pages on the remaining chieftains of the Medellín Cartel, digging deep into the operational mechanics of the entire organization, not just Escobar's corner of it. If you have the nerve to uncover how a gang of small-time smugglers clawed their way up to become the wealthiest criminals of their generation, then prepare to face the Medellín Cartel on the other side of the law. Chapter 1. Dawn of the Godfathers. The Devil's Alliance is forged. The German-blooded boy and his first lesson in crime. Carlos Lehder stands as the only Medellín kingpin to put pen to paper to chronicle that bloody chapter of his life. Every one of his operations, Escobar's shadow aside, was recorded. George Young, another player in the game, also spoke of Lehder from his book to countless interviews. Young, the man immortalized by Johnny Depp in the famous film, is another story for another file. This dossier belongs to Lehder. Carlos Enrique Lehder Rivas. Born September 7th, 1949, in Armenia, the capital of Colombia's Quindío region. His father, a German engineer. His mother, a Colombian woman. His father, Klaus Wilhelm Lehder, had set foot in Colombia in 1927, an engineer for a German firm designing and building infrastructure, most notably the railroad connecting Pereira and Manizales and the latter city's train station. It was there he met Lehder's mother, Helena Rivas, a former beauty queen and the daughter of a jeweler. They married and soon had 4 children. After starting a family, the elder Lehder settled permanently in Colombia, renaming himself Guillermo, only occasionally returning to Germany to visit relatives. Because of his father, from childhood Carlos was called Alemán, the German. The family lived well, owning a small business importing fine oils and elite wines, along with a small hotel, the German Guest House. The establishment was under constant government surveillance, a known gathering point for German citizens. Though local officials were frequent guests, the scrutiny never escalated beyond observation. Rumors swirled that Carlos Lehder's father was a fervent Hitlerite, an anti-Semite, and that beneath the stairs of his home lay an altar dedicated to the Führer. By his own account, Carlos was the laziest sheep in the family flock. His parents tried to provide the best education, but their youngest son stubbornly resisted. His formal education was over by the 6th grade. In 1959, Helena Rivas filed for divorce, accusing her husband of cruel treatment. He countered with his own suit, citing his wife's adultery. In 1961, the Supreme Court approved the divorce, dividing the assets and the children. The older siblings remained with their father in Colombia, while Carlos and his younger brother followed their mother to the United States, settling in New York. There, as he grew, Carlos drifted through the Jackson Heights neighborhood of Queens, a hub for Colombian immigrants. A few years later, while washing dishes in a diner, he met drivers from California who worked in the car rental business. They always drove slick, new cars. One day, Lehder overheard them selling a brand new vehicle for a mere $300. When he asked why it was so cheap, they told him they'd drive it for a month or 2, then had to sell it. Carlos immediately knew the car was stolen from their agency. As he would later recount, the moment I decided to accept that tempting offer marked a turning point in my life. This decision ultimately sealed my fate in this world. It was my debut in the world of crime. He was just 18 years old. He sold that first car for parts, making a small profit. But a switch had been flipped. Lehder now had the idea to steal and resell cars himself. He devised a sophisticated scheme. In the state of Vermont, bordering Canada, all one needed for plates and registration was a bill of sale from a dealership and proof of residency. Lehder raced to Vermont, checked into a hostel, and secured a residency certificate. Then, in the Bronx, he obtained copies of original invoices from a dealership and successfully registered his first stolen car. He drove it to Chicago, selling it for $1,800 in a Mexican neighborhood. The buyer hinted that he could move more fine cars like that, and business began to boom. Carlos's next move was to approach Colombians working in parking lots, recruiting them as accomplices. When a wealthy American left his gleaming new car in the lot, they would copy the keys and steal it in the dead of night. Carlos called it a complete course in auto theft. This valet service cost him $300 a car. He then expanded, transporting the newly legalized cars from Vermont back to Medellín, Danbury Prison, the training ground of a future empire. The historic moment Carlos Lehder was initiated into the drug trade occurred in his hometown of Armenia. He was offered a job, drive his own truck to Bolivia to purchase a batch of cocaine paste, known as pasta. The journey was long and arduous. Worse, he and his cronies were stranded in Bolivia for a month and a half because the distributor decided to send not paste, but finished cocaine hydrochloride. It was their largest shipment to date, a staggering 42 kilograms. Lehder received a kilo of cocaine as his cut, but it was promptly stolen from him at the port of Galveston, Texas. He recalled thinking, "I'd rather be stealing cars than shipping coke. At least with theft, there's someone to blame." Nevertheless, he went back to Bolivia for another shipment. Later, as a U.S. resident, he was offered a part in a marijuana deal. The plan was for Carlos to rent a truck in the U.S. and drive to a rendezvous point to pick up an aircraft engine packed with 300 kilograms of compressed marijuana. But DEA agents were already lying in wait. Carlos ended up in the Dade County Jail, charged with conspiracy to import marijuana, and was later transferred to the maximum security federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut. There, he faced additional federal charges of conspiracy and auto theft. Due to his youth, he could get as little as 2 years if he pleaded guilty. Carlos took the deal and served 18 months before being deported back to his homeland. Lehder didn't waste his time in prison. He worked out, read voraciously, finally completed his high school education, and enrolled in intensive English courses, where his cellmate was none other than George Jung. As Carlos himself recalled, Jung was convinced his future was in dealing pot and invited Lehder to join him. Carlos refused, stating that after the damned engine fiasco, he would never touch marijuana again. A short while later, as the pieces of a darker puzzle began to click into place in his mind, Lehder told Jung about cocaine. The shipments he brought from Bolivia had been a novelty. Back in the early 70s, it was an unpopular commodity. Jung, however, told tales of how difficult it was to score cocaine in the United States. People were eager to try it, but it was scarce, and what little was available was of poor quality. Soon, waves of Colombian mules began to fill the cells in Danbury. They were caught at the border smuggling small amounts of cocaine hidden in everything imaginable: false-bottom suitcases, children's toys, the heels of shoes. There were even disabled individuals trying to get through customs with a package hidden in a prosthetic limb or a blind man's cane. All these mules spoke with glee of the new drug trafficking gangs exporting cocaine. Each mule carried only a kilo, 2 at most, but there was enough work for everyone. That's when Carlos turned to Jung and made a promise. "George, in 7 months, I'll be back in Colombia, and we are going to be rich." The Devil's Island, an impenetrable fortress. In prison, Lehder devoured books, but one in particular seized his imagination. It was an old volume on the Opium Wars, fought between 1839 and 1842 in Hong Kong. It recounted the adventures of British smugglers who funneled opium from India using the pirate island of Hong Kong, from which Chinese captains on dozens of swift junks would ferry the drug to the mainland. This is how Carlos described his epiphany. "I extrapolated this story onto my own plans. I wanted to bring cocaine to the shores of the United States, and this book gave me the idea to establish a clandestine base of operations near the American beaches. I wanted to build my own Hong Kong island, not on opium, but on South American cocaine." Upon his release, the 21-year-old Lehder, along with Jung, set about turning their plans into reality. Their adventures and the formation of their transport empire are detailed in Jung's own dossier. For the record, Lehder had his own take on his partnership with Jung. He claimed that George, with his erratic behavior, gradually alienated everyone and hindered the business so badly that his main distributor, Richard Burrill, whose contact Jung refused to share, expressed a desire to work directly with the Colombians. Soon, the first rivers of cash began to flow, and Lehder initiated money laundering operations, establishing a car dealership, Lehder Auto, in Medellin's upscale El Poblado neighborhood. It was at this office that he was indirectly introduced to Pablo Escobar. Escobar's cousin, Gustavo Gaviria, purchased a pair of luxury Porsches through Lehder's dealership. The rumor of two hustlers who could move product to the U.S. began to spread like wildfire across Colombia, where many were realizing cocaine's potential. Laboratories sprouted like mushrooms after a rain. Farmers began cultivating coca and producing base cocaine. This is how Lehder met El Mexicano, José Rodríguez Gacha, a resourceful owner of several plantations and labs in Boyacá. Around this time, in 1977, one of Lehder's pilots told him about Norman's Cay in the Bahamas. A few houses were for sale, and the island was perfect for the role of his pirate Hong Kong. It was only 40 kilometers from Nassau and 140 from Miami. It had a wide, paved airstrip, and because it was listed as private property, absolutely no government presence. Lehder bought a local hotel. The old men who owned it on Norman's Cay had no idea what was coming. Carlos quickly cultivated a warm relationship with the local minister of agriculture during his visit to the island, donating a heavy envelope to his election campaign, and began his takeover. More and more planes arrived, and more Colombians were hired for construction and maintenance. Within a year, Lehder controlled 70% of the land on Norman's Cay and shuttered the hotel to stop the flow of tourists. The owners of the yacht club and dive center were politely but firmly asked not to return. But the island, it turned out, was already home to more than just upstanding citizens. A few years before Alemán arrived, the island was a favorite spot of a small-time pot smuggler named Ed Ward. Ward quickly sized up the new management and came to talk to Lehder. Carlos was in desperate need of experienced pilots, and Ed, after some hesitation, began flying cocaine with his crew. A short time later, the right-hand man of the Bahamian Prime Minister paid Lehder a visit. During the visit, he was convinced he was dealing with a serious businessman when he was immediately gifted a brand-new BMW. According to Carlos, they agreed on a price of $150,000 a month to lease the island and guarantee its security. Modern beacons and radar were installed, the runway was upgraded, and state-of-the-art hangars were built. The perimeter was enclosed by an electric fence and watchtowers armed with gun turrets. There's a legend that all the locals were killed, but this is likely fiction. Only one stubborn local was found dead on his boat. The rest were quite satisfied with the large sums they received for their forced relocation. As the owner of the dive center later said, when he saw the tower with the machine gun, he had no desire to argue with the island's new owner. Carlos Lehder imported vicious Dobermans and sheepdogs from Germany, which became the trademark of Norman's Cay. The dogs, along with heavily armed guards, patrolled the island's perimeter around the clock. The guards were trained by a good friend of Lehder's named Yair Klein, a retired Israeli army officer. It was Klein who would later train the Medellín Cartel's special operatives to fight politicians and left-wing radicals. There was also a house for the girls on the island, a feature that would soon appear at Escobar's own estate. The scale of the parties on the island was simply staggering. All witnesses agreed. It was a true Sodom and Gomorrah on a single Bahamian island, simultaneously housing a horde of hardened, heavily armed smugglers alongside tons of the purest cocaine. El Mexicano, the butcher who loved football. On Norman's Cay, Lehder founded International Dutch Resources Limited as a front for his real business, renting out hangars and selling fuel to business partners moving cocaine and marijuana to the United States. For $10,000, he would rent out small, modern planes to transport the drugs and hired the pilots himself. An estimated 150 people, both Colombians and locals, serviced the island. The year was 1977. That same year, Griselda Blanco, an early supporter of Pablo Escobar, was igniting a war for control of the Miami cocaine market. Pablo himself, along with Rodríguez Gacha and the Ochoa clan, had already organized what would later be called the Medellín Cartel. And Carlos Lehder, the transporter, would soon merge organically into their operations. None of Pablo's men, as they were then called in Medellín, spoke English. They didn't know the market conditions, and their relationship with their northern neighbors was tenuous at best. A brief visit by one of the Ochoas to Miami, for instance, nearly ended in an arrest. But the product was piling up, so much so that no army of mules could possibly handle the volume. And that is when the transport company of Lehder and Jung arrived as saviors. At this point, we will step away from the story of Carlos Lehder to investigate how Rodríguez Gacha and the Ochoa clan became full-fledged members of the Medellín Cartel. By 1977, the three biggest powers had formed a friendly alliance in Medellín. At the time, their organization wasn't yet called a cartel, but each of them, in one way or another, had captured the attention of American authorities. You can review our separate file on Pablo Escobar. Here, we will talk about the others. We'll begin, perhaps, with the aforementioned Rodríguez Gacha, nicknamed El Mexicano. Like Pablo Escobar, Gacha rose from the gutter. He was born into a poor family of peasant farmers in the flower-growing village of Veraguas. Poverty forced him to drop out of school at age 12 to clear pastures for work. From a young age, he possessed a hardened character and never allowed himself to be bullied, while also displaying a multitude of criminal talents. A curious fact, he never had any official documents, no passport, no military ID, no driver's license. Formally, he simply did not exist. As a young man, Gacha went to Bogotá in search of a better life, where he met Gilberto Molina, an emerald magnate. Molina, having eliminated all his rivals in a decade-long struggle, had become the true king of the emerald mines. This is where young Gacha's talents proved useful. First, he became the Emerald King's assassin, then the head of his personal army. But the future El Mexicano had no desire to be anyone's subordinate. In the early 70s, he turned his attention to the promising marijuana trade. He quickly realized, however, that pot was an extremely inconvenient commodity to transport and, due to existing competition, didn't bring the desired profits, unlike the increasingly popular cocaine. Gacha was also one of the first to grasp a simple fact. Buying coca paste from Peru and Bolivia was an unnecessary link in the chain. So he imported coca bushes to his God and government-forsaken municipality of Pacho. In the benign climate, the bushes yielded a harvest 3 to 4 times a year, and landless peasants from all over the region began flocking to Pacho. Gacha first appeared on law enforcement radar in 1976. It was around that time he met the up-and-coming Pablo Escobar, and the two developed a friendship based on mutual respect for each other's authority. Furthermore, Gacha, unlike Pablo, never wanted to be a politician. All he wanted was to make a spectacular amount of money. As DEA agent Baruch Vega put it, El Mexicano was always a bigger target than Pablo because he was the one with most of the plantations and the largest armed wing of the cartel. By the end of the 70s, some 4,000 hectares of rugged jungle were planted with coca bushes. By the end of the 90s, that figure would exceed 150,000. The nickname El Mexicano originated at the same time. Of all the members of the future Medellín Cartel, it was Gacha who held the deepest affection for Mexicans. He owned a huge collection of Mexican hats and named his properties in the spirit of his favorite country: the Chihuahua nightclub, the Mina bar, the Heredero ranch, and so on. Like Escobar, Gacha was active in charity work in his hometown, building houses, donating money, organizing concerts. But he had a special passion for football and was one of the main shareholders of the Millonarios Club for Bogotá. Many noted it always had the most beautiful and well-maintained football pitches. In general, Colombian soccer of that era was entirely funded by drug traffickers. This was profitable for many reasons. First, they themselves loved the sport. Second, investing money in the ballet for the poor earned them points of reputation among the common people. And third, most importantly, sports organizations are a very easy way to launder money. Rodríguez Gacha's economic empire was controlled by the firm Rodríguez Gacha y Compañía, whose directors included El Mexicano himself, his wife Gladys, and their children. From this company, the drug lord controlled his agribusiness firm, Inversions y Andanzas, through which he supplied cattle to his farms. He also financed the Chihuahua horse farm, where his luxury horses were kept, chief among them Tupac Amaru, a stallion purchased for $1 million from the elder Ochoa. The company's recognizable logo, the silhouette of a horse's head, adorned the entrance to his main house in Pacho, called Casa Gacha, renowned for its opulence. The house was built by Japanese architects. Gacha loved live concerts but respected others, so the walls were soundproofed. The interior was astonishingly luxurious. Bearskin rugs, antique European dishes, and gold. Lots and lots of gold. According to legend, even the faucets in Casa Gacha were made of pure gold. Beneath the building was a system of money vaults and secret tunnels. In Bogotá, Gacha owned 8 fabulously expensive apartments and an entertainment center near the Guaymaral airport, from where the finished cocaine was flown out. Next to the airport was his own hangar with several assigned aircraft. Thus, by 1982, Rodríguez Gacha possessed the highest commodity potential in the cartel, yet he never claimed ultimate power. He was content to be the leader in his remote territory, where he was the governor. The Ochoa clan, wolves in sheep's clothing. That was not the case with the third member of the Medellín Cartel, the Ochoa clan, perhaps the most enigmatic member of this criminal syndicate. Unlike Pablo Escobar and Rodríguez Gacha, the Ochoa brothers were born into a decent and respected family of cattle ranchers in Antioquia. Their great-grandfathers had received state honors for opening the region's first horse fair and veterinary academy. In general, the Ochoa family name was associated with horse breeding. Griselda Blanco, for example, hated them for a reason. Having grown up in the city's slums, she had looked upon the beautiful Ochoa house on the hills with envy since childhood. Though it should be noted that their position and status in Medellín at that time did not equate to super rich. Rather, they were simply wealthier than most other residents, who were worried about where their next meal would come from. Jorge Luis, the middle of 3 sons of Fabio, Ochoa Restrepo, and Margot Vasquez, was born 2 months before Escobar and had known him since childhood. The Ochoa patriarch, a cartoonishly fat man, was known as the best horse trainer in the province and had bred a new, refined breed. In the mid-60s, Fabio opened a family restaurant called Margaritas. Everyone, adults and children alike, worked hard to keep it afloat. Jorge himself and his brothers, the middle one David and the youngest Fabio, as well as his sisters, would be at the stove or washing dishes as soon as they got home from school until dawn. Lawyers and newspapermen often noted Jorge's allegedly difficult childhood. It was said he dragged his family into cocaine smuggling because he felt sorry for his mother and sisters, who broke their backs from dawn till dusk. But in truth, it remains unknown exactly how a decent and respectable family became entangled in the drug trade. Jorge Luis rarely weighed less than 90 kilograms and, like everyone else in the family, looked nothing like a criminal. An exemplary family man, quiet and gentle in his manner, he occasionally allowed himself a glass of dry white wine. He didn't even smoke tobacco, let alone drugs. However, he possessed a real entrepreneurial streak. He considered the American addiction to cocaine a vice, but a rather harmless one. Let those who can afford it indulge, and he, Jorge Ochoa, will prey on human weaknesses. In the mid-70s, he began visiting Texas on business and observing the market. Ochoa then traveled to Miami as a specialist in the import-export of horses. He was making contacts among local Colombians to market cocaine on the east coast of America. The role the family patriarch played in all of this remains a mystery. According to one version, he was the mastermind not only of his clan, but of the entire Medellín Cartel, and was the only one Pablo Escobar called his patron. According to another, he simply took part in some operations and therefore lived his life quietly, dealing with horses, and was never once brought to justice, trying to distance himself from his sons who chose a vicious path. In 1977, in sunny Miami, Jorge Ochoa showed a truly provincial carelessness. He boasted that he brought 100 kilograms of cocaine into the States. This was likely a one-off, because the year before, one of his relatives had been arrested at the border with a tiny shipment of 1.5 kilograms, which meant that they, like everyone else back then, had been transporting via mules. His interlocutor turned out to be a DEA informant, of which there were many in Miami at the time. On October 12th of that year, Jorge handed this man a suitcase with 27 kilos of cocaine and asked him to take the drugs to Miami. The DEA then arrested 9 Colombians, among them Jorge, Ochoa's sister and brother-in-law. Jorge himself was the only one who managed to escape. When he saw the police, he jumped on a motorcycle and sped away, miraculously avoiding arrest. Jorge left Miami and never returned. That year, Pablo Escobar, along with his cousin Gustavo Gaviria, was already overseeing the collection of coca paste in Ecuador from Bolivia and Peru and its processing in Colombia. Escobar and Ochoa, as the largest and most ambitious businessmen, joined forces to increase production capacity. They also ran laboratories and sold cocaine to distributors who controlled its marketing in the United States, where profits were 6 times higher than from sales in Colombia. Rodríguez Gacha then joined as a full member of the organization. When Carlos Lehder, who bought the Bahamian island of Norman's Cay, joined the company, supplies increased. The Devil's Alliance and the insurance of death. By the early 1980s, Escobar had created a kind of central office for the Medellín Cartel, where small players in the drug market could go to favorably sell their consignments. This decision was a masterstroke. It became simply unprofitable for other producers in the region to try to sell their goods themselves. It should be noted that those who didn't show off and agree to the terms of the Medellín leadership were dealt with respectfully and peacefully, and there was always enough money for everyone. But those who tried to rebel against the cartel's expansion were crushed. And a monstrous feature of the Medellín unions was their vindictiveness. Those who crossed them were slaughtered to the last man, even if they couldn't be found at once. According to a scheme set up in the office, small sellers loaded their cocaine into Escobar's and Ochoa's large shipments, and they made sure that no one bypassed the cartel. They ensured small shipments and never sent a shipment away unless they had the proper amount of cocaine in stock to be replaced if the shipment was seized. DEA agents coined this insurance system the nickname Medellín Lloyds, after a well-known banker at the time. Thus, by trading through the Medellín cartel, small businessmen risked virtually nothing. The Devil's Alliance was truly forged, ready to drown a nation in blood and power. And so, the pieces are on the board. The unholy alliance of Escobar, Lehder, Gacha, and the Ochoas is forged, and their empire of cocaine is ready to unleash its power. But building an empire is one thing. Holding on to it is another. The real war, the war of bullets, bombs, and blood, is about to begin. Join us in the next chapter as we open the file on the Reign of Terror, the hunt for justice, and the violent rise of the world's most feared criminal organization. Please subscribe to Detective TV Podcast so you don't miss a single clue.